but I feel I have to say at least a couple of points, a couple of personal points that are dear to my heart about the Iranian nuclear crisis. And points that are not only well understood, I think, by the international community. One, to restate the obvious, the Iranian crisis combines all major strategic issues in the Middle East. It's a symbol, it's also a substantial issue that captures both the energy proliferation, the security of Israel, the security of Saudi Arabia, the question of democracy in the Middle East, Shia identity versus Sunni identity, etc. You name them. Of course, there is a question of terrorism too. But the Iranian nuclear crisis is not only important because of its nuclear dimension, but because the question of Iran encapsulates all the major strategic issues of the Middle East and even of the world today. Second point, pessimists like myself about Iran, because I've been a pessimist about the evolution of the Iranian nuclear crisis since 2003, the pessimists, unfortunately, have been right. You know, in 2003, when I was saying to my good friends, experts of Iran, quote unquote, who were saying that, you know, Iranians will never do this, will never do that, I say, yeah, I think I will, and I tell you why. Because historically, this program is advancing in a way that I have seen before. And the way this program advances, if history is any guide, tells me that the Iranians will go to the threshold and are extremely motivated in doing so. So far, the pessimists, unfortunately, have been right. Third point, and that's linked to my second point, not a lot of people have noticed that the Iranians are mimicking, to some extent, the way the Pakistanis have been dealing with their own program in the 80s. That is talking about enrichment first, making enrichment not only a right, but also a symbol of prestige, independence, and modernity. Hiding, of course, their military intentions until gradually they made hints about the existence of these tensions, etc., etc. I mean, it's fascinating when you put in parallel these two programs. They have much more in common than it would seem. Of course, I don't think Pakistan is the model for Iran. I suspect that the real role model for Iran is India, but we can come back to that during the discussion. Fourth point about Iran, I don't think it's useful to talk about dates. I think this whole debate about, you know, when will they get the bombs, I think it's a moot point. And I'm always asked by, you know, French or international media, you know, what do you think? 2012? It's irrelevant. Why? Because it assumes that the Iranians have already decided to go beyond the threshold as soon as possible, which I'm not sure they have decided. It also does not take into account the kind of difficulties they can encounter on the way. So I'm not going to, if one of you asks me, when do you think the Iranians can have the bomb, either I'm not going to reply, or I'm going to give you a 2 hours long reply, and I'm not sure you want to hear this. Because you have to make scenarios, you have to make hypotheses, etc. The fifth point I want to mention about Iran is that based on history, once again, some countries can arrive at the threshold without ever having decided to build the bomb. I know what I'm talking about. This is what my country did in the 50s. There was never, in France, a real strategic, high-level political decision to build the bomb before 1958. We arrived at the threshold without any major political decision in that regard. Of course, then the decision was taken in 1958 to build an operational force, and that was a huge political decision. But we arrived at the threshold without having ever decided to build the bomb. So it's irrelevant to ask oneself, has Iran decided or not decided? No. I mean, the program builds up, builds up, builds up. And if history is any guide, all countries which have reached the kind of development that Iran is at now, it will not stop. No country that has invested so much in its program, and they have invested a lot, financially, technologically, scientifically, and they're good. The Iranians, you know, have extraordinarily good scientists and engineers. They have invested a lot, and countries which have invested so much tend to go all the way. This does not mean that things cannot change. Maybe there will be one day a political decision to stop. But again, if history is any guide, it's going to be very difficult. Some people talk about the so-called Japanese option. I think it's an insult to Japan, because I think the Iranians have actually conducted many more illegal activities than most other countries. And I'm not aware, by the way, of any illegal activities in Japan, which is, after all, one of the most inspected countries by the IAEA in the world. So I think that, in fact, Iran is way, way beyond Japan. Now, I don't want to talk too much about Iran. We can discuss that further.